Okay, well, good evening, everyone. My name's Anne Graham. I'm the CEO of the National Transport Authority, and we just wanted to give you a quick update on some public transport project plans. And then I'd expect that we'll be doing some questions and answers at the end, Feljin, I presume. So,
Yeah, so
yeah,
you can present, and then we can go through questions
yeah,
until you
sure.
have time, basically.
All right. So, just to say that everything that we do in terms of our strategies and any policy around public transport provision and transport in general, they're supported, or they support, the national strategies, the National Development Plan, the National Planning Framework, and then Climate Action Plan 2021. They're obviously key strategic documents that we work to, and then. A more recent one is the Department of Transport's own National Sustainable Mobility Policy, and that's a strategic framework to 2030 for active travel and public transport journeys. And it aims to deliver at least 500,000 additional daily active travel and public transport journeys by 2030, and a 10% reduction in the number of kilometres driven by fossil fueled cars. And then make it easier for people to choose walking, cycling, and use public transport instead of having to use a petrol or diesel car. So there's a lot of actions. There's an action plan associated with this, and many of the actions to be delivered for the department are actually to be delivered by us in the National Transport Authority. So there's a lot of, I suppose, governance around how we deliver on behalf of the Department of Transport. And that's all available, all those actions, and that policy is available on their department's website. And then we work in the kind of area of transport strategies. So obviously we've a statutory obligation to provide a transport strategy for the Greater Dublin area. And as you know, we delivered one in 2016 that was approved by the Minister that looked forward out to 2035. But we're also obliged under our legislation to do a 6-yearly review of our transport strategy. So that has also been completed. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And that's now with the Minister for approval. The Galway Transport Strategy was completed a number of years ago, and we've committed then to review that now in 2022 and to start that review, to kind of consider where the transport demand is at this stage, and also, to take into account the climate action and the emission standards or the emission reductions that we need to deliver for Galway as well. The Cork Transport Strategy is completed, Limerick and Shannon, second public consultation underway, and then Waterford Metropolitan Area Draft Strategies was published a number of weeks ago for public consultation. But I know your focus is particularly around Dublin, and this is the Greater Dublin Area Transport Strategy 2022 to 2042. So I'm not going to go through it in any huge detail, but just to say that it is a statutory 6-year review. There was a number of detailed studies and analyses and modelling resulted in the draft updated transport strategy to take us up to 2042. And it takes into account our climate emission targets as well as the changed transport patterns likely to arise from COVID. And so I've only just listed what's new in terms of compared to the previous strategy. So what's new is that the DART Plus, it's proposed to extend it to Kilcock, Naas and Sallins and Wicklow. There are additional train stations proposed at Cabra, Glasnevin, Houston West, Kylemore, Woodbrook, west of Sallins, west of Louisa Bridge and west of Maynooth, plus the opening of the Kishogue station. It's proposed to extend the rail from M3 Parkway to Navan. And then set out in the transport strategy is that another additional Luas lines should be designed for delivery post 2042. And they're listed there, Luas to Clongriffin, Balgriffin, Luas extension to Tirlstown, Luas to Blanchardstown, Luas extension to Clondalkin, Luas to Tala, stroke Kimmage, Luas to Tala, stroke Knockline, and then Luas to UCD Sandyford. So this is the transport, the rail, both light rail and heavy rail, and what's proposed to be delivered by 2042, which is the combined rail network with Metro, Luas lines, the proposed Lewis and then the Dart Plus. But when you put on top of that what needs to be delivered post 2042, you can see that all the key corridors into the city are covered, or the demand will be such that you will require a light rail and heavy rail network of this scale in order to deliver sustainable transport movements around the region. So another key part of the strategy was the climate action management. So there's a total reduction of 51% in CO2 emissions over the period of 2030 relative to the baseline of 2018 required. And this can be achieved by increasing the proportion of travel by sustainable modes and reducing the level of usage of petrol diesel powered vehicles, as you know. However, with all the infrastructure and the modelling that we undertook as a result of all that infrastructure being delivered, there was still additional demand management measures needed to be put in place in order to achieve the overall 51% reduction goal. And that could be a combination of parking restraint, zonal charging, additional tolling, road pricing, or further vehicle electrification. Now, in the strategy, we don't set out what the combination will be, but we've undertaken or we've committed to commencing a demand management scheme for the Greater Dublin area, in which all of these this year, we're going to commence that later on this year, and that will go out for public consultation, in which these combinations will be set out of what we believe in a lot more detail what's required in order to meet our climate action targets. So just moving to the National Development Plan, just going to give you an update on all the major projects for the Dublin region, being Metrolink, BusConnects, Dart Plus, and walking and cycling infrastructure. But before we do that, we just need to reflect back on, I suppose, what has been a decade of underinvestment in our public transport system. And as you can see there, in 2010, 2011, you could see the economic crisis that Ireland faced resulted in a very low level of investment in our different infrastructures between heavy rail, light rail, the bus programme and active travel. Really what we were doing was just maintaining and keeping as much as possible the existing infrastructure maintained, but there wasn't really any enhancement of that infrastructure other than the delivery of Lewis Cross City, which would be part of that programme. So, but now post kind of 2019, in 2020, 2021 and 2022, you can see very significant growth in the investment, and that's going to continue now through the decade of the National Development Plan. And now our challenge is to deliver the ambition that's been set by the Minister across all these different programmes, particularly in the active travel space. So just to give you an update on Metro and Light Rail, well, obviously good news today. And the alignment is completed. So the business case submitted to the department was approved by government yesterday, and that was publicly launched today. And a planning application is to be submitted now in September 22. So I suppose finally this project is moving to the next stage, which is the planning phase, and we want to move it, or we want TII to move it forward now to begin construction in 2025, and hopefully for delivery of services in the early 2030s. That's just our network. Then I think I've looked at that slide before. But in terms of other light rail planning, what the National Development Plan has set out is that we will complete the planning for the additional routes, which is the Lewis Finglas. So the second public consultation on the preferred route has now been completed. The Lewis Lucan route options analysis has commenced, and I've just included their route options analysis for Lewis Cork is also completed, and consultation will commence later this year. In terms of the Dublin Dart Plus plans, so what we're focusing on is the project that Dart Plus was set out in the original transport strategy. That's what forms the programme that's going to move forward at this stage. And at a later stage, we could see that there could be a case made to extend, as we have set out on some of the lines in our 2042 um, transport strategy. But for the moment, this is the alignment of the different lines that are now being worked on by Irish Rail, the different projects on the different alignments, and they're all at different stages, and I'll just give you an update on that. So the preliminary business case has been approved by government late last year, and that allowed the first order to be placed for the new battery electric DART trains. So what we had set out right at the beginning of the program, when the program was being put together, was that we wanted to increase the capacity on the system even in advance of the electrification work happening. And that's why we agreed with Irish Rail that they should order some battery electric darts that can operate without the electrification, without the overhead wires. So that allows then, as I said, for once they start to be delivered, that we can increase the frequency and the capacity of the commuter rail system. But they're still working on all the improvements, including the electrification. So the planning application for DART Plus West will be lodged later this year, and very soon, in fact. And the design work and public consultations have commenced on the DART Plus Southwest and the DART Plus Coastal Line electrifications as well. I think they're hoping to have the DART Plus Southwest application later on this year. BusConnects, obviously, that's a key project that the NTA is working on directly. And as you know, BusConnects is looking to improve every aspect of the bus system. It's about building a network of new sustainable transport corridors. It's about completely redesigning the network of bus routes. It's a new state-of-the-art ticketing system, implementing cashless payments, revamping the fares, new bus livery, new bus stops, new park and ride, and then zero-emission bus fleet. So the status we have now is that we've implemented three phases of the BusConnects Dublin network. They've been completed, and there are two further phases planned in 2022, and we hope to complete the full network rollout by 2024, subject to us getting the funding for that. In terms of bus corridors, that should actually have been updated to say that the first three planning applications have been lodged for the sustainable transport corridors. That's Clongriffin to city centre, Blackrock to city, and I think it's Blanchardstown to city centre have been lodged with An Bord Pleanála, and all 12 applications to be made by the end of 2022. A park and ride office has been established and a strategy has been developed for the GDA. We're proposing three park and rides are being planned along the M11 for bringing forward for planning later this year. We've also engaged with TII and local authorities on the provision of bus lane on the M4, N4 and on the M11 hard shoulders, with planning to commence on the M4, N4 one later this year and on the other one in 2023. We've also commenced the procurement of the account-based ticketing. So that's a key delivery that's looking at the next stage of our Leap Card system. So account-based ticketing, as I'm sure you're aware, is where rather than your account being held on your card, on your Leap Card, we will operate an account, a system where your account is held on the back office, and that you can use different forms of ID, including your phone, a card, a bank card, to identify the start of your journey, and then at the end of your journey, and either it'll be prepaid or post-payment. And this system will allow us the flexibility to do an awful lot on the fares in terms of what we can offer to customers, and allows in future the possibility of giving credit for those that use public transport more than others, so that the longer you travel or the further number of trips that you take, they may become cheaper for the later trips. So it just gives us that kind of flexibility in the future. But at the moment we're in the very early stages of the procurement, and we have a number of interested parties now that are that are interested in tendering for this system. So a key part of the delivery of, I suppose, our reduction in carbon emissions is to ensure that we move our urban PSO, that's our subsidised bus fleet, to being zero emission. And as you can see on the left-hand side, in 2021, we had primarily a lot of red there, which is a lot of diesel engines, even though they were all at, a lot of them, a high proportion of them were Euro Code 6, which, you know, had reduction of the of emissions, of particulate emissions in particular. But now we're focusing on CO2 emissions, and we're moving the fleet through hybrid electric fleet to fully zero emission battery electric, both single deck and double deck fleet. So that just gives you the pathway for delivery, and you can see in Dublin it will take us just on a normal fleet replacement. It will take us up to 2030, just after 2033, to fully replace all our Dublin urban fleet to zero emission. So we've 280 diesel electric plug-in hybrid double-deck buses. They've been delivered and they're now in operation. About 20% of Dublin buses fleet is now hybrid, and I'm sure you've seen those around the city. Much of clean, very obviously cleaner air, and also in terms of noise, a huge reduction in engine noise as well, operating around, and much more pleasant journey if you're on the bus, as well as being in and around the bus. Orders have also been placed for fully electric single deck buses and fully electric double deck bus fleet as well. And we hope to see the first of the double deck fleet operating in Dublin early next year. We've also purchased 3 hydrogen fueled double deck buses, and Bus Éireann they commenced a trial in 2021, and they're still operating those on services, the 105 services. I think it's from Ashbourne into the city centre and onto UCD. So now if we looked at investment in active travel, so as you can see, again, I've just pulled out the investment profile on active travel in and around 2015 up to 2019. Again, relatively small numbers across the not just the GDA, but also outside in other urban areas. But you can see that post 2019 to 2020 and beyond, we've seen a very significant increase in active travel expenditure. And I suppose that's challenging in one way, because there is a large number of projects now that we have to manage. So overall, across the country, there is 1,026 individual projects that are at different stages of delivery in terms of active travel right across, with 350 of those being in the Greater Dublin area, and then a number being in campuses, hospitals and educational institutions as well. So very significant number. It's now kind of challenging to meet the Minister's ambition in this space, but one of the areas that we're looking at is branding the programme of delivery of the network. When you look at, I'll just come back to that, but when you look at the overall network of cycling infrastructure that we want to deliver, so this is the Greater Dublin Area Cycle Network with the different primary, secondary and greenways. It's quite a complex map, both spatially and although it's spatially and geometrically correct, it's complex and cluttered for people to understand. So our proposal is to move to a more communications friendly and to focus on the core corridors. What we want to deliver over the next 3 years in particular is that key corridor of network and connected network of segregated cycling facilities across this map, rather than spreading ourselves thinly across multiple projects. We want to focus now on delivery with the local authorities on this network so that people can get around and then build on the network beyond this. So that's our focus. But at the same time, we also want to, if I go, sorry, I'll just go back up, is to brand the network as well. So we are proposing to brand the cycle networks in the cities CycleConnects. It's obviously very similar to our BusConnects branding, but it's really to try and identify what a program of deliveries and this is the kind of branding that we want to deliver across all our kind of city networks, and to make it readable and a lot more understandable about what's going to be delivered over the next 3 years in particular. So if I just go to some of the projects now that are being at various stages. One is Sutton to Malahide, a very significant project being delivered by Fingal County Council. Clontarf City Centre is not just an active travel project, it's also about looking at a full sustainable corridor. So it's walking, cycling and public transport. So that project is underway, under construction, and will deliver very significant infrastructure in the next year or two. This is just some examples, but I'm sure you're very much aware of yourselves of what South Dublin County Council have delivered in terms of the quality of the infrastructure along the Dodder Greenway, Phase 3, and being very well used, and then also kind of providing spaces for people to rest and to appreciate their environment as well as an important part of the delivery of the active travel infrastructure. We also published with the Minister the Walking and Cycling Index, and I'm sure you've probably have seen copies of that, but it really, I suppose, showed that the people of Dublin want to see safe segregated cycling facilities provided, and they're willing to give up a section of the road in order to deliver that infrastructure. So it certainly supported and gives us comfort now that we're moving in the right direction in terms of really upping our delivery and accelerating our delivery in walking and cycling infrastructure. But there are challenges to delivery, and one of the areas is in getting skilled resources. So we got approval to fund a number of skilled resources in all the local authorities. So if you see that 57 were employed in active travel in local authorities, mainly in the GDA and regional cities in January 2021. And in Q1 21, sanction was given to increasing this to 320, with an allocation given to all local authorities. And so by the 1st of April, and I'm sure this has improved since then, 190 active travel staff were in place across the local authorities. So this is a very important resource now to try and get delivery on the ground. And this has been supported by government through ourselves. Planning process. So the planning process for active travel schemes and cycle schemes in particular can become contentious with significant media attention. I just want to give you an example here, like the Galway Ring Road received 79 observations to onboard Planola, and the recent public consultation on the temporary cycle lane along Salt Hill Promenade received almost 7,000 observations and had live commentary on national news. So the common thread through most of these contentious projects, contentious for some, is loss in car parking and to a lesser extent the impact on traffic capacity. But there's no doubt that they can become, as you can see here across the different media, quite divisive in some communities. But certainly not that we were concerned about this, but we do need to ensure that local authorities and their councillors work with us to try and see and to promote the benefits of this type of infrastructure, and try and see can we build up even more public support for delivering these very important projects. Construction inflation is something I'm sure you're all aware of. It is significant at the moment. It does mean that when we're looking forward in terms of what can be delivered for the funding that we've been provided, if construction inflation continues at the level that it is now, it will have an impact on the number of projects that can be delivered. But at this stage, it's of concern, and it's of concern nationally, but we're still forging ahead with local authorities to deliver as much infrastructure as possible, but it's certainly something we have to keep an eye on. And I just want to have a few slides on making public transport services more attractive. And, you know, we've been working for very many years now at this stage to try and improve public transport services in particular. And, you know, additional services is one of the I suppose the key ways of getting more people to use public transport. And additional services could be additional frequency, or it could be additional coverage. And we did invest quite significantly over the years in delivering increased frequency, 24-hour services, some 24-hour services, with Dublin Bus in particular. And those have seen, pre-COVID anyway, very good results in terms of growing our public transport usage. We've also worked with operators to improve the reliability and punctuality of the services. So in the contracts that we have with operators, they do not get paid for the services that they don't operate. And we set quite high levels of targets for the punctuality. And again, there's incentives for them to reach those punctuality. If they don't, there's deductions in their contract. We've also worked hard to start improving the information at stops, as well as providing better quality shelters at stops as well. And then we developed the Transport for Ireland brand as the unifying brand for public transport. In terms of technology and integration, and this was part of our work going right from the beginning, but we also continue to improve these. We have our National Intermodal Online Journey Planner, an app, real-time passenger information and signs and app that we continue to try and improve. And we have our integrated ticketing via our Leap card, and we've introduced many, I suppose, aspects of on Leap, and the most recent one being the young adult Leap card. And the 90-minute fare is obviously a key delivery for under BusConnects as part of our improvements to the service to customers. Mobile ticketing is an app that we've developed, which is more for services outside of Dublin, but it's TFI Go, and it's been developed for longer distance travel. So I just want to give you a feel for the impact of COVID-19 on sustainable transport. As you can see, this is just the picture right across the pandemic. So we were up around 800,000 trips on a 7-day rolling average. That obviously fell off a cliff at the start of COVID. And we've seen recovery, you know, over the last 2 years. And if you look towards the right-hand side of the graph, we have seen the trend is upwards in terms of recovery. And we're at about overall 83% of pre-COVID passenger journeys at this stage. What we have seen is that the numbers travelling at the peak time in terms of commuter travel has reduced. So our peak travel has reduced, but we've seen significant growth in the interpeak services, in evening services, and in weekend services, such that they actually, in some cases, have exceeded pre-pandemic levels at those times of the day. So what's of concern, of course, though, is that as the public transport numbers aren't recovering as quickly as our traffic numbers have. So the top one is the M50. As you can see there, that's almost exceeded pre-pandemic levels. The canal cordon hasn't. The red line is actually the traffic at the canal cordon, and it's more or less recovered, and public transport is still recovering, although we're very pleased with the level of recovery that we've got to at this stage. So the question is always asked is post-COVID, do we need to continue to invest? And as I said, work-related travel and commuting will reduce in the short term. However, travel demand is increasing for other purposes. So while congestion on public transport at the peak will be eased, it does allow us the space to make the improvements in capacity, speed and reliability that the investment in infrastructure will allow us to deliver. But car congestion is continuing to rise, and the cost of time lost due to congestion in the Dublin region is forecasted to rise to over 2 billion per year in 2033, and our transport emissions are increasing. So we need to ensure that public transport customers do not change to the car mode. We need to meet our carbon emissions targets, and we still need to invest in sustainable transport improvements. Mass transit will still be required in cities, and demand will continue to grow. So that's, I think, a very quick run through on where we are, Feljin, and we'd be happy to take any questions, myself
Thanks,
and Hugh.
Anne. So we have, by my count, well over 30 questions and about
Already.
120 people in the chat. So apologies, we won't get around to all of them. So I'll try to get like a mix of different topics as opposed to talking about Metrolink all day or cycling all day.
Yeah.
We can take them in groups of 3.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one, and you've probably heard this quite a few times, are there any plans to bring in bus lane cameras and or red light cameras? Is there a time frame for the publication of the Lucan-Lewis route options? And is intermodal transport, park and ride, bicycle, scooter parking a priority of the NTA at this time? There was a similar question for the park and ride. Is bicycle parking also planned?
Okay. So I might, you might help me on some of these, but the first one, Feljin, again, remind me again, was the
bus lane cameras.
Yeah, so one of the important, I suppose, aspects, if we're investing in BusConnects infrastructure and bus priority in Dublin on our main corridors, we believe that it's important to have the right level of enforcement on those corridors to ensure that they are kept free for the sustainable transport use because of the frequency of the buses that are going to be using that. So we believe that the more appropriate enforcement is camera-based enforcement, and we've put that, it is an objective of the road safety strategy, as well as the sustainable mobility strategy, to now look and see how camera-based enforcement can be delivered to facilitate I suppose, the most efficient use of the bus lanes. Hugh, you might cover the other 2 questions, if that's okay.
Sure, and just to say there are 2 actions, one in the road safety strategy and one in the National Sustainability Mobility Policy to advance and expand camera enforcement in line with what Anne was just saying there. On the Lucan-Lewis work is ongoing in relation to that. At this stage, it's likely to be next year, early next year, before we're in a position to bring forward the first round of public consultation after we've got to a certain point in the route options process. So that's going to be next year. I think the third question related to park and ride and integrating with all the other mobility modes, and in regard to whatever sites we develop for park and ride, wherever it's appropriate, we will include those. There are some park and ride sites that may be out near national roads, for instance, and the level of micromobility allowance we will need for those will be different than ones closer to urban areas. But our intention is to properly ensure that those sites can be reached and accessed by the people who need to get onto the public transport service. You're on mute,
Feljin.
All right, I think I'd get used to it. The next 3 would be, is there any indication from the NTA to adopt best practices from Dutch cycling design, such as proper protected junctions, because it's clear from projects like BusConnects and even local cycling projects that designs of the so-called Dublin-style protected junction, whose safety is not proven, is widespread. So the Dublin-style junction versus Dutch junction. Is construction of Metrolink intended to commence before or after the 2025 general elections? So that's February 2025. I worry it could meet the same fate as the previous Metro North back in 2011. How likely is the early delivery of the new Lewis routes? Is there a priority among those?
Okay, might ask you to do the first one anyway.
So we've developed a spectrum of design solutions for junctions that have to take account of the constricted space available to us. Where we've got sufficient space to do a certain type of junctions that people might regard as a Dutch type protected junction, we do that, but it needs more space. And in other cases where we don't have that space, we've had to develop solutions to fit within the geometry available to us. And it's not a case of just one solution is going to fit every place. We do have a portfolio of solutions, and we do deploy them wherever we think they are most appropriate. But it so in all cases, as far as we're concerned, we're not going to put forward any junctions that we're not satisfied with are safe and proper to use. That will always be the case, and it may not be obvious from people just looking at a plan drawing how the junction fully works in practice in terms of signal phases and things like that, which mightn't fully be clear from a drawing. So I suppose just to summarize, it's not a case of one or the other. Both of them can be deployed, but certainly in the type of streets we're dealing with on BusConnects, where we've very limited space and constrained locations to deal with, we have to be very clever in how we use up that space and still put in the junctions that are needed for everyone, both cyclists, pedestrians, public transport users, and indeed the residual car use. On the other two items, then the Metrolink timeframe. I think your question was whether or not the construction will start before the next election. It's fair to say Metrolink is not being designed along an election cycle. It just isn't. I think a lot will depend upon the Board Pnála process, how long it takes, and also whether or not there are any judicial reviews. So there are two things that we just have zero control over: how long the Board Pnála process will take, and that's dependent upon level of objections and so on. And then at the other side of it, whether or not there's a judicial challenge which holds it up. So neither myself nor Anne nor anyone else can predict that with certainty. I think in all likelihood the construction is going to be after the next election, but that's just simply going to be a function of the process we go through. And I neglected to take down the third question, so maybe it's for you, Anne, was it?
It was the early delivery of the Lewis routes, so that
Yeah.
was, and there isn't one, that's chosen above the other. I suppose the way that would be considered is in the next review of the transport strategy, which would be in 6 years' time, it's really to assess what is the travel demand at that stage, and are we seeing that growth is on certain corridors has the potential to exceed what can be delivered by BusConnects. And it'll be on that basis that a Lewis line would be considered along those particular corridors. Would that be right, Hugh?
Exactly, Anne. Yeah.
Okay, so the next three, was any consideration given to using trolley buses rather than battery electric buses? And I suppose similarly kind of BRT style as opposed to double deckers. Are there any plans to continue to integrate any new existing stations with Dublin bikes? And similarly, are there any plans to significantly expand bike sharing schemes in the city, integrating the current various providers? And I would kind of add to that the anomaly with Dublin bikes and TFI bikes being separately managed. Is there any plan to bring that in?
Okay. So we did consider trolley buses, and we did consider articulated single deck vehicles. So in the case of, say, the BRT type, you called it BRT type vehicle, the downside of the articulated vehicles is the ratio of seated to standing passenger it means there's more people standing. That works wonderful when you're in a fairly compact city with relatively short routes and people only have to stand for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at most. A lot of our routes, because Dublin is so spread out, are very long routes that go all the way out to Balbriggan in the north, and down as far as Greystones in the south, and out to Maynooth and Leixlip in the west. And basically, when we would end up having fewer seats for passengers, and it just wasn't. And that's why double deck buses were chosen in the first place, to provide that extra seating capacity for longer routes. So in the case of Dublin, the double deck vehicle actually is the right solution, just given the type of city we have. And we did look as well at the issue of trolley buses, and I think if we are gone to electric buses and battery electric, and that avoids the need of having to put overhead lines and catenaries and all that streetscape interference that you have with trolley buses, which are very expensive and can be environmentally very damaging. So for all those reasons, we think the right solution is electric buses for Dublin, and thankfully the market is now able to deliver us electric double deck buses, which means the standing versus seating issue, we continue to give it the right solution. New stations for public bike share schemes in Dublin, it is a different scheme. We don't run it. It's been run by Dublin City Council with JC2Co, and I don't think there are any additional stations on the horizon at the moment. There have been a couple of expansions of that scheme, but there are none on the horizons presently. We have a bigger interest in seeing how we can integrate the bike share schemes that are out there. We now have at least 2 commercial bike share schemes, and then there's a third one in Dunleary that sometimes crosses the border into the city and so on. In our view, there's effort required to integrate those schemes. And in answer to your question about, do we see ourselves expanding that? Yes, is the short answer. We do think there needs to be a significant expansion of bike sharing, but it needs to be on a much more integrated, regulated basis than the current arrangements, and that's something hopefully over the next couple of years we'll be able to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Some of the active travel budgets seem to have been spent on upgrading roads rather than on cycle lanes, footpaths, etc. And I suppose similarly, some of the quality has been questioned among different local authorities, not necessarily across all of them. So what is the oversight of the funding that's given out to local authorities for active travel funding? The next one, Metrolink aside, why is the aesthetic quality of so much public transport infrastructure so incredibly poor, particularly when compared to public transport in other European cities? Examples, pallet stand, train station, and bus stops with advertising screens. I know there's a little bit more aesthetics given to Metrolink, or given consideration, but I think that's a fair question. This one's a long one. The best performing route for Dart Underground and the Dart Plus Tunnel Route Option report that was published last year is almost identical to the 2014 Dart Underground Railway Order. Given the same route has now been identified twice, I was surprised to see it postponed. What obstacles are there to building Dart Underground? Is funding commitment the main issue?
Okay, I'll take those on if you want.
That's fine.
So, yes, it's worth saying that up until recently, we were running what was called a Sustainable Transport Measures Grant. So that was covering both active travel and also bus measures and traffic management measures. So there's a mixture in it. And yes, we did invest a certain amount of that budget in resurfacing roads. And there were roads where there was lots of cyclists on it, but the road surface had deteriorated to a very poor quality, and nobody else was resurfacing the road. And yet, from a cyclist point of view, it was poor quality offering. So we invested in resurfacing those roads, which we saw as providing a benefit to both cycling and whatever public transport use was along that particular corridor. There are other places where we contribute to a piece of infrastructure because it benefits. It may have a roads function that's understood, but it also has benefits from a cycling network provision or a bus linkage provision, or both. In terms though of the quality of designs and oversight, yeah, it's fair to say we're not satisfied with the quality of designs in a number of schemes. We've intervened in, people don't see it, but we've intervened in lots and lots and lots of schemes and made changes and corrected errors that should never have happened in the first place. And what's happening now is we are doing more of that, and we are bringing We have an external resource assisting us to try and ensure that the quality of designs are at the level they need to be. And some local authorities have got really good at it, and they you know, they're in stage they could teach us how to do it now. And then other local authorities are still on a learning curve and need a lot more effort and help. There's no resistance from local authorities to doing to officials from trying to do the designs right. It's simply they just haven't done it before and haven't got there yet. So it takes a fair bit of hand-holding in some cases. On the aesthetic standard, I wouldn't agree that all the aesthetic standard of all public transport is poor. I think that's a bit of an exaggeration. Um, even the bus shelters on O'Connell Street that were mentioned in the question, it's taken 20 years to put in those bus shelters. They're being resisted for 20 years, and they actually are designed to a really high aesthetic standard. They were quite expensive, stainless steel, polished stainless steel throughout, and agreed with Dublin City Council's planning department in minute detail before we went forward with it. And yes, we put in advertising screens, which are digital advertising screens, to defray some of the costs associated with it. But the actual standard of the shelter itself, a lot of effort even went into that. I do think there are some things that we don't have good enough yet. I think some of our ramps at train stations in particular are of a poor aesthetic, and I think we need to do more. So I'm not saying we've got everything is right. That's not the case. But I think it's equally not the case that everything is wrong. So it's a bit like the election slogan, lots done, but more to do is probably the position on that one. And on the Dart Plus, this comes up frequently, and I think the question boils down to why are we not building the Dart Plus tunnel? That's really what the question boils down to. And maybe the simplest way of explaining it is that back a number of years ago, before the Phoenix Park Tunnel opened, there was a major when you did any assessment, there was a major gap in the DART system that needed the tunnel to plug that gap. However, back a number of years ago, at a relatively low cost of about 17 million euros, we managed to reopen the Phoenix Park Tunnel, and are running services now through it. And in a couple of years' time, DART services will be running through it. That's been a game changer. And when we use our transport models, which a number of you will be aware of, to assess what the future would be with and without a DART tunnel, the following is what we get. By 2042, there's roughly 1.4, 1.5 million public transport trips across the day in the Dublin area coming out of the model without the DART tunnel in place. When we put the DART tunnel in place, we get about 10,000 extra trips. That's all. Yet that's going to be a multi-billion euro project. And the reason the additional trips are so low is that they're being accommodated at the moment on the services that will be going through the Phoenix Park Tunnel, on Lewis lines, on buses, and we're simply taking those, we're transferring them onto the DART tunnel at considerable expense. So our view is that sometime it will need to be done, but just now there's more significant piece of infrastructure to be built. So our recommendation was keep this under review, but that's the overview of where we stand on the DART Plus tunnel.
I'll
Back
take
to you,
that as a
Feljin.
hint that the strategy that went to the minister doesn't have DART Plus tunnel in it.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so 3 questions here. The first one is the N3 to M50 road upgrade project is a road project that TII are pushing through with Fingal, but doesn't seem what the NTA supports. Your thoughts on the project? The road has proposed 1 bus lane, which is not enough to gain tag as a public transport project. But I suppose from an NTA point of view, that project has to be in the GDA transport strategy for it to go through. So maybe your thoughts on that from that point of view. It's not really a question, but there's a couple of comments here about 24-hour buses, so I might just ask, what are the plans for 24-hour buses, just in terms of the BusConnects phases, and is it 1 per phase, or just an update on that would be really good. Similar enough to the previous one, speaking of making public transport attractive, is there any plan to commission public art and/or designers to add more colour and liveliness to the Metrolink stations, and maybe DART Plus as well? Because I think for Metrolink there is, but maybe the other public transport projects as well.
Okay. You want to start, Hugh, and I'll do the 24-hour?
Sure, yeah. So the N3 to M50 project, you're quite correct. It's a project proposed by Transport Infrastructure RTI and Fingal County Council. And in simple terms, in our view, there's no sense in adding additional road capacity along the N3 to feed into the M50, which is already congested, or to feed into the Navan Road on the other side of the M50, which we're putting a BusConnects corridor along, and which equally won't have the space for additional car usage. However, there are some safety issues along that section. Including some a junction out to the west that's a very substandard junction, and some weaving movements and so on that need to be addressed. So my understanding is TI will be bringing forward a proposal, and the strategy allows it to address safety and layout issues in this area, but it's not for the purpose of increasing radial road capacity, because that would make no sense. And I haven't seen the details of the final version of the project, but my understanding is that's what's been proposed. And I'll skip to the third one and then hand you back to. And third one was public art to add more colour and liveliness. I think the one thing that probably Metrolink doesn't need added to it now is anything that adds to its cost. I think we're and a lot of effort has gone in with a superb firm of UK architects to design quality stations on the Metrolink project. There is a public art scheme still in place. It was introduced back, I think, 20 years ago. It's still in place that requires major projects to do up to about 50,000 worth of an art installation as part of in association with a project. That's still in place. But any infrastructure that new infrastructure we build in terms of things like new dart stations, etc., we will ensure that they get up to a high standard. But and as I say, the public art side of things will take care of itself. Back to you, Anne, on the 24-hour bus.
And I might just add this question to that as well. What are the plans for Dart, Lewis, and Bus 24-hour services? Because I know you were speaking about Lewis recently as well, so let's take all that in one go.
Well, obviously, you know, it's our objective to increase the services and to supply public transport to meet, I suppose, the growing nighttime economy. Is my sound okay? Yes, sorry. Yeah, sorry. So it was always our objective to put 24-hour bus services and deliver those to meet the growing travel demand, I suppose, at night time, not just for those that are accessing social activity, but also because of allowing for access to workplaces, you know, for people on shift and traveling to at an early part of the day to hospitals and other activity or other workplaces that operate on a 24/7 basis. So even before BusConnects, we had delivered 3 24-hour services, the 15, the 39, I think it is, and the 41. And then with BusConnects, we've delivered along the C-spine 24-hour services. The new N4 service that operates, which is our first orbital service that's operating on a 24-hour basis, is also now in operation. And we propose along the G spine, which is the spine going out towards Ballyfermot and Cherry Orchard, to introduce 24-hour services. That's in our plans for this year, for later on this year. And then, you know, as spines in particular are rolled out, it is proposed that there will be 24-hour services on those. I suppose the key challenge now is getting enough resources, enough driver resources to be able to deliver the increased frequency and the network, as well as working into the night. And our operators are beginning to find it challenging now to actually recruit drivers because of the way the economy is at the moment. But subject to being able to get additional driver resources, ensuring that the funding continues as we expect it to continue to deliver the BusConnects network, we will see a network of 24-hour buses being delivered, operating on a 24/7 basis right across the city. In terms of Dart and Lewis, it's a little bit more difficult because the track, both on Dart and on Lewis, there's only, in terms of Lewis, about 4 hours available through the night, because I think they finish operating at about 1 to half 1 and start operating again at 5. So they only have a 4-hour window each evening to do any kind of track maintenance work. And also fleet maintenance work also happens at night time as well. So by putting on 24-hour services on Lewis, it means that you would need much longer shutdowns of the light rail system in order to be able to deliver the ongoing maintenance of that infrastructure. Similarly on DART, again, they only have a certain number of hours available through the night to be able to continue with maintenance. What we're trying to see is whether there's a possibility of pushing the last either tram or DART a little bit further in terms of Friday and Saturday nights. But again, it would be challenging because of the maintenance regimes that are already in operation, particularly at weekends, because on a Saturday night they get a little bit more of a time frame because of the later starting on Sunday. And that gives them a lot more time to be able to deliver the maintenance. So certainly our ambition is to do more on the bus side, but it's more challenging to do it on the light rail and the heavy rail. But we could do it for short periods of time, like Christmas, which is what we've done over a number of years. But 24/7 basis on light rail and DART is probably not feasible at this time.
Okay, so the next 3 questions. Has there been any consideration given to creating a bus terminus for the privately operated scheduled intercity bus routes to remove them from the quays? Because that's a big problem on Aston Quay and all the other Dublin quays. Will passenger information systems across all public transport modes be integrated as more projects are rolled out? For example, on a DART pulling into a station, it will tell you which BusConnects spines are nearby for interchange options. And similar to an earlier question, but slightly different, is the geographical distribution of the active travel funding. It seems to be somewhat uneven, especially in Dublin City. For example, Dublin South Central area is being outspent 17 times by a neighbouring area. And you can kind of see that in some other suburbs as well.
Okay, so the first question there was about removing commercial bus services
So
from
I
the
suppose
quays,
kind of
was
like
it?
a bus RS for private
Oh,
buses, I suppose, I think.
okay, so more of a bus station, the provision of a bus station in order to, well, it's something that certainly we need to look at, but we haven't done enough work on that at the moment to say that that's something that we would definitively do. But there's no doubt that the quays are getting busier, and in terms of the number of services that are operating on the quays, it will reach capacity at some stage, and I think we do have to possibly consider, particularly on the west side of the city, whether there's a requirement or a need to have some kind of either bus interchange or bus not necessarily bus station on the west side of the city. And at the same time look at bus hours and see, can it be opened up for other commercial services? And we've got an ability to be in our act to be able to require bus hours, subject to agreeing kind of payments on the service, to require the operator to make that available to commercial operators. So we can make that a shared service, and that's something we'll consider in the future.
On the other 2 points there, if I take them on. So one was passenger information systems, will they become more integrated? The answer is yes, but it will take time. We're really, all our passenger information systems developed almost individually, a piecemeal over probably a decade and a half now, and we're now kind of changing the foundation of all of them to give us a better architecture to allow that future integration. So, for instance, what we call our automatic vehicle location system, which is at the heart of a lot of the bus system, there's a number of systems operating. That's going to be replaced with a singular system in about 3 years' time or so. The rail system has been upgraded, and when all of that when all of those foundation pieces are in place, we'll then be in a position to provide the kind of type of integration, seamless integration that's been referred to in the question there. But it does take time. These are enormous big pieces of IT kit, and it's a very large project each time you go and try and upgrade them and change them. So it will take a bit of time. On the geographic distribution of active travel, we're not conscious of that when we're doing it. So we allocate funds to local authorities on where we see the projects having been most developed and capable of being delivered. So for us, it's not a question of north side versus south side or one area versus another area. However, I think in what Anne showed earlier about the cycle connects and the core city networks that we're planning, that'll bring a bit more focus to this, because our intention is to really focus on the core cycling networks within those cities, as opposed to prioritizing everything. We need to prioritize something. So we prioritize those core networks and focus on delivering them over the next 3 to 5 years, whatever it takes. And that by itself, I think, will ensure that we're dividing up the investment in the places that legitimately need it. So that would be our plan to address that issue. Back to you, Feljin.
Okay. So there's a question here about account-based ticketing and Google Pay. I know you touched on this briefly, but I can't quite remember if you gave a timeline for it. I think I heard 2024 from Barry, I think it was. So maybe if you have a timeline for it, maybe you could give that. And then moving on to the next one. What is the NTA doing to reduce soft costs in transport project delivery, such as by bringing critical steps like route options assessment in-house rather than by being provided by consultants? The next one, are there plans to introduce a central TFI customer service hub, online, social phone? Currently, the websites of Dublin Bus and Go Ahead have different formats of timetables. Passengers need to contact different operators for social media. There's no information after 7 p.m, so maybe you could talk about the customer care centre that's planned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just on the account-based ticketing, so it's, as I said, we've started the procurement of that. It is a very significant IT project, so this is one that we have to kind of carefully manage, and to ensure that the costs associated with delivering this, don't exceed what's been set out in the budget. It's included in our BusConnects budget, so our focus will initially be on the Dublin area, and then we'll extend it out to services outside of Dublin. But in terms of timeline, the timeline you got from Barry is that to deliver account-based ticketing in Dublin will take till about 2024. All right, that will be, I suppose, our timeline for that, because it is a significant piece of IT development. So the soft costs, Hugh, on route options analysis.
Yeah, I haven't heard them called that before, but the route options analysis stage, just to say, in my mind, is the most important part of a project. It's relatively easy to build a project once you've been through the whole planning process. It's relatively easy to do the detailed design. The really hard bit is making sure that you're building the right project in the right place. That is the really hard bit, and that is the optioneering stage, and so many things go wrong at that stage. So when it comes to a project that you're bringing through a planning process like on board Panola, that option stage becomes highly critical, because in an environmental impact assessment report, the alternatives you've considered and how you've evaluated them become really important. So it may look like one of the easy stages of the project, is actually one of the more challenging stages, and more as the projects get larger, it involves the use of sophisticated modelling to choose between options, the carrying out of economic analysis, and these are skills which local authorities are able to do, but they don't have the resources available to them to do it. So our position is that when it can be done by a local authority and is capable of being done, and they have the resources, happy to do it with the local authority. But in general, we're finding that no, they need the assistance of some external resources to carry it out. So, and it's for that reason you see more and more of these things being done externally. If the opportunity arises to change some of that in the future, we will. But as I said there, it aside from the expertise, it does come down to the level of resources available. Back to you, Anne,
And I
on
think
the service hub, is it?
Yeah, so what I should have included in my presentation was that we want to deliver a centralised contact centre for all public transport. That's a key project, key TFI project, and that work, the procurement of that service has started, and supporting that then will be a much more developed TFI website, and a more standardisation of the delivery of timetable information, real-time information, etc. So the idea of a centralized customer contact center is that there will be one contact point for all your public transport journeys. And while we'll still require operators to have I suppose a service provider to ensure that we get the detailed information from them, the customer will contact our customer control center first. We'll give as much information as we can, which generally tends to be timetable information is what we find most people, most of the calls are about, and lots of that can be just delivered directly by our own customer contact center. But where there's service issues or service delays or complaints that are being made, some of those will require the operators to assist us in responding to, and ensuring that it's a much better, I suppose, response to customers, and a much more integrated response to customers in terms of particularly when things go wrong on public transport. Oh, back to you, Feljin.
Yeah, if I could just go back to the Apple Pay thing. I know we talked about this before about the virtual leap card option that you were looking at as a proof concept. Would you have any update on that, or would you think that's feasible, or?
Sorry, I just missed your.
We were
I think
talking
my
about
contact.
the virtual leap card option that you were looking at as a proof of concept.
Yeah.
Would you have an update on that, or that's a viable option?
We don't know whether it's viable yet, so we're still at proof of concept stage. So that needs testing. So while we've developed a virtual leap card, we need to test it in the live environment to see does it work before we would consider whether we would develop it more and productionize it more as a project, or bring it forward looking for funding and put a team on it. So at the moment that testing is going to commence in September, and we'd hope to have a view then on whether it can be brought forward as a project for delivery.
Okay, so the next question. Many bus stops have out-of-date timetables. Does that responsibility fall to the operator or NTA or TFI? Will the current driver shortage impact the upcoming rollout of BusConnects phases? And I would love to know if there are plans to include a bus lane on the M1 and other remaining motorway corridors. I suppose that's outside the M50 we're talking.
Okay, so what we're trying to do in terms of timetable production is that in terms of our responsibility is to put up the bus stops and the infrastructure to support the timetables, and then give the information to the operators for them to post then the updated timetables. Now we know there's plenty of places where that has not been improved at this stage, but we're improving that infrastructure as we roll out the BusConnects network, new network of services. So at times it may be our responsibility, but we do rely on the operators to kind of deliver and keep the timetables updated as much as possible. But we know we've a good bit of work to do, and that's because there's lots of timetables at this stage that do need updating. In terms of the driver shortage, we hope it won't impact on delivery of BusConnects. What we need to ensure is that we particularly get the extent of the network and the coverage delivered across the next 2 years, and to deliver all the services that we identified. What we may have to do, and what we would probably have to do now, just looking post-COVID anyway, is to see, do we need the same level that we had designed in of peak services? They may not be needed now because of the reduction in that peak travel, and that resource then will be that driver's resource could be used then to deliver and ensure that we have enough drivers to deliver the network, the wide network that we're talking about. So we're hoping it won't impact, but it's just something that we've begun now to see being challenging, which we didn't have before. But our objective is to continue to deliver BusConnects as we had outlined, but to probably consider a small reduction in the peak services if it's not required because people aren't travelling to the same extent at the peak. On the bus lane, Hugh, on the M1?
Yeah, I think with the bus lane, the question was on the M1 or other radial routes. So in the transport strategy that went out for public consultation, and indeed in the one that's now being provided to the Minister, there were 7 corridors radiating out from the M50 on which we were planning to put bus priority. And that does start at the M1, it goes all the way around to the M11. 2 of them are being worked on actively at the moment. So in the case of the M4 between Leixlip and Maynooth, there is a scheme that is well developed now at this stage to add what we call hard shoulder running. In other words, change the layout of the hard shoulder, and during certain hours, peak hours, that becomes a bus lane effectively, and then outside those hours it becomes available as a hard shoulder again for emergency breakdowns and so on. So between Maynooth and Leixlip, it's intended to install that hard shoulder running on the inbound direction, and that's a scheme that I think should be ready to go to Kildare County Council as a Part 8 planning application later this year. And it doesn't require a lot of construction, so hopefully it can be done next year. In the case of the N11, M11, that's a different scale of a scheme. It's going to require some road widening, and because of that, it's going to have to go through a process with An Bord Pleanála. That's likely to be, and that extends all the way from Loughlinstown roundabout down to the junction north of at the north end of the Glen of the Downs. So quite a section there where there's bus priorities planned on both sides of the road for large segments of that route, and that hopefully will go to An Bord Pleanála. Unfortunately, probably at the end of next year before that can happen. After we get the M4 into the Bord Pleanála's process, the other corridors will start being looked at, which will include the M1. So work hasn't started on it yet, but will start hopefully in the next year, 18 months.
Okay, so I think we'll keep going for maybe another 10 more minutes and end it there. So the next question, I noticed that the 2042 map still had the Lewis going south on the Green Line section south of Charlemont. Will this now not be upgraded to Metro as originally planned in the previous strategy? And the next one, is the Lewis orbital route using any of the preserved routes for the old Metro West? Don't know if they were preserved. It appears that the stretch of land parallel to the Dizzlestown flyover might be reclaimed by the developer if Metro West is now dropped entirely. And the last one, any word on how the N4 route is performing so far? I think I'd be interested in that, knowing it's the first orbital route and a 24-hour route as well.
Okay, well, I'll just start then. On the N4 route, we actually, I don't actually have figures on the N4. It's only been operating a few weeks at this stage. So, but what we've found in terms of the other routes, the H spine and the C spine. In terms of the H spine, we've seen very significant growth. I think it's around 22% growth. Above what would have been the baseline recovery post-COVID in terms of the H spine along the Howth Road, which we're very happy to see that kind of level of usage. In terms of the C spine, we're in and around, I think, 12% growth on that spine, and which again is encouraging, and we hope that will continue to grow. But on the other ones, unfortunately, I don't have an up-to-date information on how they're performing at this stage.
Anecdotally, I think it's been doing fairly well and it's been very well received. It's in my area,
Yeah.
but maybe the timetables need to be adjusted a little bit because they're always stopped outside DCU waiting for the to catch up.
It might be the running time.
Yeah.
The running time might need to be adjusted, and that's what we do after we operate them for a few weeks, is particularly to find where there's bunching happening or whether the running time might actually be too generous, and then we adjust accordingly. So, but I don't know what the update. I certainly have seen them quite a number of them myself, so I know they're operating very frequently at this stage. Hugh, on the other two?
Yeah, on the other two, sorry, yes, Lewis on the south side, particularly the Green Line, in preparing the transport strategy, we identified that if a Lewis was included coming in from Sandyford to the city centre along the Slorgan Road, it would take the pressure off the Green Line such that it may not need to be upgraded to Metro. So the transport strategy that you will have seen includes a proposal of post 2042. One of the 8 Lewis lines would be a line running from Sandyford into the city centre via Stillorgan and UCD. Now, the strategy is subject to review every 6 years, so we'll see what emerges. But on the basis of that analysis, we were identifying we didn't need to include for upgrading the Green Line. But the Metrolink project has been designed in a manner that it can do one of 3 things at its southern terminal point. It can continue and onto the Green Line if that's required in the future. It can continue to the southwest to form a metro heading out southwest out towards Ballycullen and Tala direction, or indeed with a slightly circuitous movement, it could actually go towards the east, towards UCD. So all of those options are preserved, but the strategy at the moment is envisaging that if we build a plan in it post 2042, we shouldn't need to upgrade the Green Line at that point. In regard to the Metro West and the orbital route, the strategy commits that at a future point we'll do an alignment study and reserve a corridor for an orbital Lewis. At the moment, the case isn't strong enough to support it being developed at this stage. So the work hasn't been done yet to identify whether any of the old Metro West alignment will work or not. That's something that will be done at a future point in time. So the short answer is we don't know whether or not it will include any of the Metro West alignment.
Okay, so it's a long one, but any thoughts on Dart Plus coastal available capacity paths, and if this has been considered alongside the stated policy objectives to run increased rail services to Belfast, North Drogheda? So it's just in terms of the delivering the hourly enterprise service and clashing that with Dart Plus coastal. And the next one, has legislative change to speed up planning been considered? 10 years ago from Metrolink feasibility to construction is too long. Bray Greystones is single track. Has a tunnel been considered here?
Okay. I just might speak on the speed up planning considered. I know, and the Minister Minister for Transport mentioned today that the Attorney General is reviewing all planning legislation to see what kind of improvements could possibly be made in the planning process to try and reduce the time frame, I would imagine, in terms of planning. But I think we can't really comment on it until we see what kind of review is, what that review, I suppose, recommends, or but certainly that work and that commitment is there by government. Do you want to speak on the rail stuff, Hugh?
Yeah, on the Dart Plus coastal, yes, there is a challenge there to integrate the longer distance service with the commuter services, and one or other has to compromise in order to make that work. So the timetabling of the Dart Coastal North hasn't been carried out. So what often gets done is you create a window in the timetable that's big enough that's long enough to allow the service that you want to accommodate, in this case the Belfast to Dublin service, to be catered for in that window. The other way is that the speed of the Belfast service may have to come down to match the Dart speeds, in which case the length of window you need is a bit less. All of that remains to be worked out as part of the project. In an ideal world, we would have an extra track along that line that we'd be able to run the service on completely separate from the Dart. But we did look at a number of years ago. The challenge of building an extra track from, say, certainly from Holt Junction into the city centre, you're talking about another project that's in the billion euro plus range to do that. And at the moment, we don't see that as appropriate. So I think we're going to work with what we have, and we're going to try and timetable it as efficiently as we can to ensure that both the DART and the intercity service is accommodated. Thankfully, by the time we get to Drogheda, the only service we may have to deal with is the intercity from Belfast. We are considering whether we can do a shuttle service from Dundalk to Drogheda, or indeed by the time we electrify to Drogheda, can we allow the train to run further on battery power up as far as Dundalk? So there are lots of things to work out, but if anyone could magic up a third track for us, it would make life a lot simpler. I didn't take down the third question, Feljin, so I missed out what the third one was.
It was the Bray to Greystones, whether a tunnel, whether we would an additional tunnel for a second track,
a single
I
track
presume.
section.
Single track section, yeah.
Again, it's a very challenging area. It's environmentally protected, and even a tunnel requires you to interact with those environmental protections. It makes it exceedingly difficult to get planning consent for something that's going through a special area of conservation, or I think that's the designation it has. That's around Brayhead. So what we've done instead is we've brought the double tracking south of Bray and the double tracking north of Greystones as close as we can, without intruding into the environmentally protected areas, and that allows us to run with clever signalling. It allows us to run 3 trains an hour in each direction between Bray and Greystone, which is a vast increase in the level of service now. So we get 6 trains an hour through the section, with three darts running in each direction. We will be looking then south of Greystones, whether there's an interchange required for services south of Greystones, such that services would interact with people coming from, say, Rosslare, would change train at either Greystones or potentially Wicklow Station and get on the Dart service at that point in time. But that is a more achievable solution in the near future, rather than the much more expensive, challenging and difficult project of trying to obtain consent for another tunnel through Brayhead. Back to you, Feljin.
Yeah, so I think I'm just going to take a few questions from a few common themes that were mentioned. So I suppose real-time information came up a lot. Can you give us an update on the plans for the real-time information? I know you have a new app planned, TFI Live, yeah. I think it is. So maybe what's involved in that? Have bus fare payment options for tourists been considered, since they cannot use the Leap card? I'm not quite sure what that means, but I suppose I have a similar question in that now that under 24s are basically paying €1, does that apply to tourists? So how does it? Is there a plan to extend that to tourists? Because they're coming in on visitor Leap cards, I presume, and paying much more than what I'm paying. So maybe you could touch on that. How will Dart Plus West impact the Sligo intercity services? I suppose similar enough question to the previous one.
So just in terms of real time, so we currently have I think it's a reasonable real-time app and a journey planner app as well. And you know, we always wanted as an authority to ensure that we had an app provided, even though others were providing that kind of information on what might be considered better apps. But we as an authority felt that it was appropriate for us and was to ensure that, you know, that we also produced an app to provide the real-time information. So they're still working on the improved or a new real-time app, and we hope to launch it towards the end of the summer. But as with all IT projects, there's always challenges in delivery, and it's been fully tested at the moment, and we'd hope to get it out. We had hoped to get it out before now, but we hope to get it out certainly in Q3 of this year. In terms of tourists and Leap card, we do have a visitor Leap card, and it is with the adult fare. I'm not sure how the under 24 hours or under 24 years could be applied to tourists, because we do need ID to identify, and I think at the moment anyway we're focusing just on people that are resident living in Ireland rather than visiting Ireland in terms of the under 24-hour and young adult card. But certainly if they are resident in Ireland for a period of time and they have the means to that we can identify or check their identity, I can't see why they couldn't apply for one while they are here in Ireland. But that's probably something we need to look at in, a bit more. And there was a question on, what was the other question? Sorry, Feljin. Dart plus.
RTPI.
Yeah,
Dart plus
Sligo.
West, and then RTPI generally, I think. So the Dart plus West, if I take that question, I think it's the same question as on the
Sligo
Northern
lines.
Line.
Yeah.
As you increase the local commuter service, in this case the Dart service, it does reduce the ease by which you accommodate the longer distance services if you're having to share tracks, which is the case out here, which is the case on the Dart Plus line. It's down to the final, what we call timetabling that we do. In other words, we may not get the luxury of a perfect 10-minute Dart service. We might have to stretch one of the minutes to 15-minute gap to get the intercity through. We don't know that yet because we haven't got deep enough into that side of the design just yet. But the reality is that, like the Northern Line, there'll have to be some compromises both on.
We lost you there.
Yeah. We may just have to leave it at that because it is now 8:30 and it's been 90 minutes. We had so many questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them, but I think there were well over 40 questions there. But I think we did well.
Covered main topics.
Got through a lot of the important ones, and I tried to do as such a varied list of questions as possible. So I'd like to thank Anne Graham, CEO of the National Transport Authority, and Hugh Creegan, who was also helping answer questions, Deputy CEO, and Dermot O'Gara, Head of Public Affairs, for helping to organise the webinar. We've been talking about this for a long time, but it's good to get an update on all these things. So thank you. And if any of the people listening would like to help us out, and if they're members, you can email us and you can join our teams, basically help us organize and talk about things, because we could really use the help because there's a lot happening. And thanks. I'm just going to kind of, if you want to stick around and have a chat, I'm basically going to promote people to presenter, and then we can all have a more relaxed conversation. There's no obligation on anyone to stick around.
Okay.
So
we might let you have that conversation. Yeah. But
okay.
Can I just say, just to say thanks very much for the invitation to present, and just thanks for the questions, and also for the interest that is shown from the numbers that have joined the webinar tonight. We're very heartened to see that number and the interest that there is in sustainable transport in the Dublin area, and we just want to thank you for being organised enough to have this and to present the users' view from the point of view of our public transport services. So thank you again, Feljin, and we might leave you to your conversation then.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheerio all. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Hugh.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Yeah.